PowerPoint up for folks to see. So just so folks know, if you want to follow along on the screen, I have two materials that I provided to the committee. They're both on the website. The one I'm primarily—
I just want to intervene.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. We're reconvening our meeting and continue our conversation of H-158, an act relating to the beverage container redemption system, also known as the bottle bill. Made one change just to the order of witnesses so that we could hear from the Agency of Natural Resources and get some more basic questions answered before we move into testimony from interested parties. So we're going to welcome Matt Chapman back to committee.
And I apologize for jumping ahead of you, Madam Chair. So for the record, Matt Chapman, Division Director with the Waste Management and Prevention Division. So you can follow along with me. I have two documents. One of them is entitled Notes. And so if that is the one I'm going to primarily be speaking from, and I guess I will also say, I'm happy to go back over some of the material that I covered in the first couple slides is material that Michael already covered this morning. But let's just quickly go through it, just so—
Not even quickly, like I think okay. Let's just, because I think we all need to hear it more than once.
Sure. So starting with the sort of first substantive slide, the second slide overall, so 10 VSA Chapter 53 is Vermont's bottle bill, and it was primarily enacted in 1973 as an anti-litter law. In fact, until fairly recently, there was no requirement for recycling of material collected in the bottle bill. So it was fundamentally focused as anti-litter. It took effect in 73. It's a form of product stewardship, but not sort of a true EPR program. So from that perspective, the franchised bottles that are covered under this have to manage return to containers, but there's not sort of the full cost of the system isn't currently covered by the bottle bill. So it is in some ways a hybrid. And as I think the committee has heard, there's a deposit on beverages. It's 5 cents for everything except liquor, and liquor has a 15-cent deposit. All right. So next slide, and I'll ask you whether you want whether it's worthwhile to go through the deposit initiation again, but Michael basically used the same visual that the agency uses with respect to trying to explain how deposits get initiated and how they come back to consumers. So again, just again, somewhat briefly.
So actually, Matt,
sure.
Right, I want to go back to your previous slide.
Absolutely.
Important bullet to consider a form of product stewardship, but manufacturers don't fully fund the cost of the system. So who makes up the difference now?
Well, so it's to some degree, there's some stranded costs, right? The agency is in charge of education and outreach with respect to the bottle bill. We manage the registration of beverage products being sold in the state. So when someone comes in and is a new beverage container, they need to register with the Agency of Natural Resources. We get no support for that work right now. We have part of one FTE that's part of one employee that spends time working on the bottle bill.
One employee. Okay, so half the time person.
I think it's frankly probably less than that. So it's sort of an unsupported bit of work that we have. The good news is with the existing bottle bill, I mean, I think it's important to kind of understand sort of behind the curtain. We're dealing with beverages that are basically franchised. So like when Coca-Cola basically sells their product into the state, they deliver it to the grocery store or convenience store or wherever. It's a very sort of we have very straightforward points of contact and people that we deal with in the existing bottle bill. Expansion changes that, right? So expansion opens up sort of the universe of entities that get covered under the bottle bill. And it's going to be outside the historic franchise chains that have existed that manage the bottle bill. And it's going to be, if you think about sort of understanding how products get delivered to like stores, it's going to go through like a regional warehouse that might be in Lebanon, New Hampshire, that then gets distributed all throughout New England. it's a different distribution model than beer and soda use and liquor use for distributing their products. And it does pose challenges on the agency and in the absence of an EPR program that's being discussed in this bill. So, and we can come back to that as we sort of get towards the conclusion of my testimony, because I think it's important to underscore that point.
Representative Sibilia.
Yeah. So I am surprised to see that the current product stewardship program does not fully fund the cost of the system. And it prompts a question for me, which is on the word that I think I now understand, which is the sheets, and whether the sheets are used for anything other than this program, and they are used for other things outside of this program. And so that sounds like we made a policy decision to not fully fund this program with the revenues, not revenues, funds. How do we consider, what are sheets considered? Are they're not considered revenues, right?
They're basically, I think of them the same way as they're unclaimed property, right? So it's basically that nickel that you put as a deposit down with the container when you sold it, didn't collect it. So just as if you abandon a bank account, that money goes back to the state. For in this particular sense, the legislature said, and we're going to use it for clean water funding.
So this will be my last question for now on this issue, but the amount of sheets that we are using for clean water funding, is it sufficient enough to fully fund the cost of this system? So if we were to dedicate all of the sheets to this, would it pay for this system? Would it be fully funded?
I would say it would be more than adequate. There would be excess money. Again, looking at the current bottle bill, not the proposal that's before you, if nothing changed, there is relatively little burden on the agency, so there would be more in its sheets than is necessary to fully fund the program.
So not fully funded is really just this part-time staff person at A&R.
It really is.
And actually, as I'm reading this, I was just going to challenge the statement, manufacturers do not fully fund the cost of the system, but in fact, that's true, because it's the sheets that, right. So it's not set up for the manufacturer. It's not set up that way, but there is potentially enough revenue to fund it, which is what I was asking.
That is, yes.
Thank you.
And I think it's probably also important. This is a system that was created in 1973, well before our modern notions of what product stewardship are. I mean, so it bears a resemblance, but we have largely left the bottle bill sort of structurally untouched since its inception back in 1973.
So actually, I think both things are true. So the manufacturers are not fully funding the cost because that's not how the program is set up, period. But also, I think I heard you say it's a stress, it's a financial stress on the agency. There's not enough resources which is my question, back to my question.
Yeah, so again, I think being really, really clear, the system as it exists today without the expansion of the bottle bill is there are agency costs, but they are manageable within our existing workload and framework, right? It does not create a burden that is insurmountable on the agency. I'll go ahead and steal the thunder from the end of my presentation. One of the major reasons the agency supports the EPR proposal that's before you is that it creates a structure that continues to basically mitigate the workload impacts on the agency while concurrently creating a much better collection system for consumers in the state of Vermont. So we support the modernization of the bottle bill that is proposed here. There are language changes and things sort of in the bill that we have suggestions on, but at the broadest scale, were supportive of the EPR model that's being proposed in this bill.
So,
Go ahead.
well, so I just want to ask, so is this drastically different than last year when this was vetoed?
So this wasn't vetoed last year.
Didn't get across.
It's
Great.
right.
And it
you.
may change. So it helped, that's
Perfect.
actually good, just so folks know. We passed an update to the bottle bill. It did not include really an EPR. It was just updating the bottle bill. The Senate took it on. They explored and added this generally, that's why I asked Michael O'Grady, language that would make it into an EPR. And here's where we're picking up the story there with the bill that did pass the Senate, but didn't meet the calendar. We didn't get it to the governor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back in, and then we can continue any questions and conversation. I think I'm going to skip to the third slide, so it'll be the one with the map of redemption centers there. So this visual is also up on the agency's website, and we keep it up to date. This shows how many certified redemption centers there are in the state. And one of the challenges we've historically heard is that, well, let's just back up just a second. Any individual can request to be a redemption center. It's fairly straightforward to become one. There's very little requirements. You certify to the agency that you want to be a redemption center, and we basically let you in. There is no geographic distribution that needs to happen currently with redemption centers. We have some towns that have 3 to 5 redemption centers, and then large areas of the state that have no redemption opportunity associated with them. And the agency has identified this as a challenge that this bill tries to tackle, to increase the ability for Vermonters to collect or have opportunities to redeem and collect beverage containers through this program. Next slide. So this is kind of I think it's good to talk about what sort of capture we're seeing, what sort of recycling are we seeing through all the systems that we have out there. So we did a fairly broad systems analysis about 10 years ago and saw that the bottle bill is getting approximately a 75% redemption rate. So that's pretty good, right? So we're seeing a good amount of redemption taking place through the bottle bill. In 2018, we did what we call a waste composition, which is basically going to solid waste facilities and looking what's coming in the garbage. And we're seeing that about 72% of mandated recyclables, which includes both beverage containers and everything else that goes in the blue bin, is being recycled. And I would say that's a really good rate too, right? We should all be proud as Vermonters. We're doing a lot better than a lot of other jurisdictions are with respect to our recycling rate. When you combine both of those systems together, you're seeing around almost a 99% recovery rate for bottle bill materials, right? So some of it's getting redeemed through the bottle bill, some of it's getting captured through the blue bin system. When you put them both together, your collection is incredibly good. So, and then the last sort of point from the Department of Liquor and Lottery. And then we have better data now that we have escheats. We're seeing through the escheats data that about 76% of non-liquor containers are being redeemed. So again, it's continuing to stay around that 75% redemption rate for bottle bill materials. Yes.
So what about the liquor bottle redemption?
I don't think we have data from Liquor and Lottery. I mean, we can get it from them. It's not sort of here.
Let's do it.
Okay, thank you.
On the next slide, in 2018, 2019, we conducted a significant survey of redemption centers, manufacturers, and other parties that are sort of play in the bottle bill system. This is really just intended to show you that there actually is public support for transitioning to an EPR system in the bottle bill. Both the the manufacturers, redemption centers, and other participants were supportive of that when 4 or so years ago, we surveyed them on different changes or enhancements that might happen. The largest one that came back was an EPR program.
It was the CLYNK. The very end, on the far right.
Oh, so that's actually it's probably good to talk. I mean, we can talk a little bit about technology. I mean, so Clink is one of the technologies that is out there that is used in redemption. It, rather than having a person counting your cans or a machine that you put the cans into, it's basically like a bag drop with a tag that has identifying information on the bag that basically it goes back to a accounting facility where they run it through a machine, and then they deposit where they put the deposits into an app account that I have. So if I wouldn't get my deposit immediately, but it gets deposited into an app or a bank account of mine. So.
And do you know what jurisdictions are using that?
I know that it's used a lot out. It's used out on the West Coast. I can get you a list of jurisdictions that use it, and a lot of jurisdictions use combined approaches to this. I'll sort of break out of my testimony a little bit and say that I think one of the benefits of moving to an EPR model is that we can use a lot of different technologies as far as giving consumers opportunities for collection in a way that works for them. I might be a lot more comfortable and willing to go throw a bag into a roll-off and get my redemption value in a week after it gets counted. And that works better for me. Whereas some other people who are picking up litter on the side of the road, it might want the 5 cents now, right? And so I think we need to have a lot of different choices and take advantage of the evolving technology that's out there to make the system better.
Representative Stebbins, Lynn Smith.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So this survey, was there an option for people to select that was like, this program currently works great, or do nothing? You know what I mean? Because like the option E, I guess I'm just trying to find out, like, is there anyone who feels like the current program from 1973 is good enough and they might have picked that option? Just trying to put the option E in context.
I will go back and I'm happy to share a copy of the survey too. There's a little bit of detail of what each of these options are on it. Excuse me. But, I think that if you talk to most people, there are challenges with the existing system. I think if you talk to most redemption centers, they would tell you they sort too many cans, right? That one of, when several years ago we went to commingling, which is again sort of one of the biggest changes that we've made to try and get beverage distributors to work together to have a sort of, you throw material into one bag as opposed to multiple bags and have them work the financial agreement out on the back end. It worked really well for a while. And I know you're going to have Bree Deatley in, and she can probably tell you a lot more with respect to the details of the evolution. But we basically we drastically reduced the number of sorts, and we've seen it grow over time. So again, we have, roughly speaking, around 100 sorts, and that a redemption center has to do with the cans that are coming in. To give you perspective on an expanded bottle bill, right? So Maine has a broadly expanded bottle bill and has a system that's very similar to our current system. They have about 500 sorts in each of the redemption centers in Maine. So
Maine also has a Clink program.
yes. So with respect, on my last slide, we sort of divide the bill into two components, right? There's the modernization component and transitioning the bottle bill to an EPR program, and the agency supports that. We think it's important. We think it's the right thing to do, both for consumers and frankly, also for redemption centers to improve how, frankly, reduce number of sorts and make their lives easier. In an ideal world, prior to going through expansion, the agency would recommend that we dig deeper into how the different systems operate together. We have a report from about 10 years ago that goes through the cost analysis of the bottle bill, the blue bin recycling system. What it doesn't look at is what I think programmatically ANR would say is an important tool that we need to be looking at, which is product stewardship for packaging and printed material. It's one of the larger components in our waste and recycling stream. And it also is another sort of program that layers over beverage containers and containers generally. So ideally, we would be looking to try and make the system as efficient, as cost effective, and as convenient for consumers as possible. Our data is old at this point. So that is really the conclusion of my testimony. I'm more than happy to answer questions about the bottle bill, the underlying bill, or some of the background data that's out there.
Representative Sibilia.
So I have some places for DEC here. Can I just ask a series of questions? Okay. So in 1522, which is existing.
I gotta catch up.
Oh, sorry, page 5, line 12. This is existing. There is the difference between the liquor bottle deposits collected and refunds made is retained in a liquor control enterprise fund.
Mhm.
So how will that interact with the PRO?
So I need to go through and look at the bill in depth on this issue, but I envisioned there being likely two producer responsibility organizations that coordinate: the Department of Liquor and Lottery handling liquor and everyone else. And so this was not, or at least in last year's bill, admittedly, it was put together quickly. That was the intent of allowing DLL to continue doing the work that they've been doing with respect to liquor collection and redemption, and then allowing the rest of the system to basically expand in this way. I think DLL complements what happens here. And it's not atypical that we have multiple PROs in these types of programs. So I think it would work.
So what I think I'm hearing you say is that this existing fund and existing law will stay with its existing program, and it will not go to the expanded program. It will not be connected to that. Okay.
Yes.
The enforcement question that I had asked Michael O'Grady earlier around A&R and DLL, and then the PRO. Can you just kind of describe again how you see those things working, kind of the division of?
Sure. I mean, so I think there are a couple things that are out there. One is that the PRO becomes clearinghouse for where beverages register. They have to participate with the PRO. The PRO sort of handles all of that registration function that previously existed with the agency, and that is a very good thing. If beverage brands are not registered with the PRO, then we would enforce against those beverage brands using our existing enforcement authority under Chapter 201 of Title 10. So it's basically civil penalty-based enforcement. we also have the authority under this bill to basically tell someone who is not participating with the PRO that they need to stop selling their beverage in the state of Vermont and take it off the shelves. So those are sort of the two enforcement mechanisms that exist.
I think Michael had noted that it was unclear about liquor bottles, what would happen with liquor bottles with this expansion, because they'd be able to be accepted. And then let me just see if I'm saying this right. So they'd be able to be accepted in this new expansion, but that they're being sorted. So they'd find their way back to the appropriate program. Is that?
I didn't hear the exact exchange that went on between you and Michael, but basically what would happen is they would be sorted and managed through this program. I mean, DLL runs a very different system. Like you can't sell liquor outside of the state system, right? So all liquor basically goes to and through them. So some of the enforcement challenges that might exist with a private beverage brand doesn't exist with DLL or their process.
So liquor bottles that may find their way into, well, like a redemption center, they end up back where they're supposed to be.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That's great. I think I had one more.
That's an existing process now.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think that if others have questions. I'm
Well,
looking
we
for
need
my
to
notes.
move on to other witnesses because we have a bunch of people waiting.
So we'll have Matt back.
Sure.
Happy to.
Just getting started.
Right.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Testimony. All right, with that, we're going to invite John Langus up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure, I sent my PowerPoint to Catherine. I'm not sure if I need to plug in here with my computer or if it will already be.
It's actually better if you run it, but
Okay.
are you in the Zoom room? No. Can you just run it?
Oh, is that the easiest way for me to just log into the
Okay,
Zoom?
Kate will do it. I want to be aware, just sensitive to time today, but your presentation is now behind you and also members on the webpage.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here in person after doing this a few times on different issues over the last few years over Zoom. It's much better to be able to see everyone and to have some real back and forth here. So thank you for having me. My name is John Langus. This will be the next slide. My name is John Langus. I live in Norwich. I'm here with one of my business partners, Pam Miles. I'm a former member of the Norwich Select Board. I'm a renewable energy entrepreneur. I'm owner of Wisdom and Power and Vermont Energy and Consulting Firm. But relevant today, I am one of the owners of Putney Road Redemption Center in Brattleboro. Putney Road is operated for over 30 years in Brattleboro, has been owned by my partners and me for about 6 years now. That's a picture of our crew right there when we were brand new owners of the place. I've got a few more gray hairs since that picture. We understand that Putney Road is the single largest independent redemption center in the state of Vermont. We think we're responsible for about 6% of the statewide volume just through our shop. Next slide, please. So I'll go through one more time. Madam Chair, you had said that everyone benefits from hearing a couple of times how this system currently works. So I'll go through that real quickly from perspective of a redemption center. So the bottle bill currently mandates that beverage companies, as the producer of the disposable containers, collect a 5-cent deposit on disposable containers for carbonated beverages sold in Vermont. The deposit then provides an incentive for the consumer to return the container to the manufacturer so that they can properly dispose of it. The deposit is first charged by the manufacturers of the beverage when the beverage is sold to retailers. The deposit is then collected from consumers by those retailers who sell those containers within the state of Vermont. Consumers pay the 5-cent deposit when they buy the beverages in Vermont, and then they can get the deposit back by redeeming the empty container either where they purchased it or at a certified redemption center like ours. The big difference between these two paths is that the retail outlet is only required to redeem those brands that it actually sells. For an independent redemption center like ours, we are required to redeem any container that has the Vermont 5-cent stamp on. So once collected, those redeemed containers are then picked up either by the distributors, in the case of the retail outlets, or by TOMRA in the case of redemption centers. That's a monopoly company that has the license to collect all these things on behalf of those beverage manufacturers. We're paid the 5-cent deposit, and then we also get a 3.5-cent handling fee, 4 cents in the case of sorted brands, as compensation for having collected and sorted and taken care of, packaged for recollection, all of these containers. And then finally, all the deposits not paid back through the redemption process to consumers are then paid on to the state in recognition of the burden that those unredeemed containers have on solid waste disposal systems in the state of Vermont. Those unredeemed deposits are commonly referred to as the escheats that we talked about in the last session. Next slide, please. So the bottle bill is not a sexy piece of legislation. It doesn't generate big headlines, doesn't drive political careers like the expansion of broadband, the increase of the minimum wage, repair and recovery of Lake Champlain. The container redemption industry is not a sexy industry. It's dirty, sometimes smelly, it's physical work. We make our living 3.5 cents at a time. That handling fee that's added to the 5-cent deposit when our redeemed containers are bought from us by TOMRA on behalf of the container manufacturers. But we do make a difference in Vermont, in the lives of our employees, the lives of our customers, and to the environment of Vermont and beyond. Quietly working largely out of sight, the bottle bill is the most successful piece of environmental legislation in Vermont. Its success is driven by the workers who redeemed those containers. If you want to celebrate and reward success, if you want to add momentum to the one area that we're winning a critical battle for sustainability during this climate emergency that we've declared now a couple of times here in Montpelier, I urge you to vote to expand the bottle bill and make the necessary once per generation increase in the handling fee. So some people would say, why mess with something that works so well, right? If it's not broken, don't fix it. But in business, hopefully also in government, there's another adage that says that if something works, you should do more of it. That we should focus our energy on what we've proven works and is effective and do more of that. Beyond that, despite a dramatic increase in the amount of recyclable material being placed by Vermonters in those recycling bills over the past decade, the 76% that we heard in the last testimony, way less material is actually being recycled in Vermont and beyond. In some communities, redeemed containers are the only stream of recyclable material that's actually being recycled. The most prominent recent example of this, unfortunately not a rare one, was the discovery in 2018 that Chittenden Solid Waste District had been dumping recyclable glass over several years in its landfills. It's well documented and undisputed that the widespread adoption of single stream recycling has decimated recycling in the United States generally and in Vermont specifically. So some have argued that the expansion of the bottle bill would result in too many redeemed containers to handle. That seems like a great problem for us to have. Triple the amount of containers being recycled in Vermont. That should be where we're going. That should be our goal. 100% net zero and 100% recycling of recyclable materials. The only problem in an increase in volume is the poor support history for the industry by TOMRA, wielding their monopoly, picking up the containers from redemption centers. But this legislation should help that, especially if it includes requirements for the manufacturers to make TOMRA do a better job of that. But it's also a difference in how the system works. So we're big enough that we do full trailers. Commer picks us up anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week, about an average of twice a week. They'll pick up a trailer and they'll leave an empty one for us. Almost all the other independent guys, they're too small for that. So they get picked up in partial trailers. Trailer will come up on very little notice. They load some stuff into the back of that trailer and then it goes on to the next center. By expanding the volume, more and more of these independent centers are going to be able to do full trailers. So when you have a full trailer, you've got these empty ones sitting out at your shop. You just fill that gradually as your business goes. You call up Tomra when you're ready to get picked up. It's way easier for these smaller shops to manage. Next slide. So single stream, it was a well-meaning attempt to both streamline the collection side of recycling while making recycling easier for individuals. You have one container, all your recyclables. Sounds really good. It has proven to be too easy. People regularly place unrecyclable materials mixed in with the recyclable ones, with the result that the entire stream becomes contaminated. And so the effort required to re-separate those materials outweighs the economic value of having done so. The recycling stream becomes just another garbage stream for a world that is being broadly and systemically poisoned by plastic waste. Redemption centers, on the other hand, provide the least contaminated stream of recyclables in Vermont. Separate by type, glass, plastic, aluminum. We separate by over 15 different categories of sizes, and then we sort by brand. Our materials are sold for sometimes twice as much as single stream materials, and they're able to be recycled again and again and again. Single stream has failed as a policy experiment utterly and completely. I urge you to fix that legislation as well, but in the meantime, please expand the system that has worked well for the last 50 years and is broadly supported by 83% of Vermonters based on the last statewide surveys done in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact that we have. The impact that we make, that one nickel at a time. Most of us measure the bottle bill from the perspective of our kitchens or garages. Our bag of cans and bottles sits for a week or two and is redeemed occasionally when it gets full. Feels good, you get a few bucks in your pocket, but what can that impact really be in a world that's being crushed by the weight of environmental devastation? Is it worth doing that? We think it's very worth doing that. So as I said, we're the largest independent. We handle about 10 million containers a year. We estimate that about 6% of the market. And here's what we do with those 10 million nickels. We have a team of 4 to 6 employees, depending on the time of the year. We have a manager who's been with our shop for over 10 years, before we even owned it. 3 other team members who have been with us for over 6 years. No employee has a college degree. Every employee is a lifelong Vermonter. Our payroll supports that team and their families. In the time that we've owned Putney Road, our headcount has stayed steady while our payroll has doubled. We're committed to paying a living wage to our employees. Each one is paid above the minimum wage, some considerably more than the minimum wage. We provide $500,000 per year to our customers. That money goes to individuals to help them make ends meet. It supports dozens of schools, churches, service organizations, sports teams, charitable organizations, all in and around Brattleboro. We have a partnership with Wyndham Solid Waste. Generates charitable donations by allowing customers at the transfer station the option of redeeming their containers rather than placing them in the recycling bill. That saves money for the waste district and helps fund local charities. By removing those containers from the waste stream, we save local transfer stations and solid waste districts the cost of handling over 30 tons of contaminated single stream glass every single year. So beyond Putney, the bottle bill statewide also helps to keep Vermont's roadways clean of litter, with an incentive for people to pick up containers that they see thrown on the side of the road. And in 2020, provided about $3 million of the sheets. Certainly plenty to cover Matt's part-time employee helping out with this program. And the rest is being used. Those sheets currently are used to help clean up Lake Champlain. Not a bad job for a pile of nickels. Next slide. So you guys have been talking about what House Bill 158 will do. It expands the bottle bill beyond carbonated beverages to cover water, juice, sports drinks, wine, virtually all beverages except for milk. When the bottle bill was enacted 50 years ago, it hadn't occurred to anyone to walk around carrying water with you everywhere like you were in the desert. right? No one had heard of Gatorade yet. Wine even was a fairly niche product back then compared to liquor and beer. So it wasn't covered for any reason other than it wasn't a material part of the garbage stream at that point. There's no good reason to not have those beverages carry their weight with carbonated beverages. The local Vermont breweries support the bottle bill. So if those small local businesses can do their part, we think that everyone else should be able to as well. The PRO that this bill would create, which all manufacturers would have to participate in, we think that that helps the system. We were nervous actually when it got put in on the last cycle. It felt a little bit like Fox in charge of the hen house to us who were sort of operate at their mercy to some degree. But we do believe that that would be helpful to the system and it would help it to run more comprehensively and more efficiently. By expanding, it would allow that more efficient pickup for the smaller redemption centers from TOMRA, making that easier to manage that increased volume. And then it also increases the handling fee. So it only gets increased every once in a while. It's been quite a while since it was last increased. As you guys know, our costs are not set, but our revenue is set by you guys. So we've gone through the same spat of inflation that everybody else is. We voluntarily increased the pay that our folks get paid. We're supportive of the $15 minimum wage in Vermont, but we need to be able to cover those expenses in order to keep performing the way that we want to perform and to keep taking care of those folks. So I do want to cover one additional point, and that's the fact that we're a border state. From time to time, the issue of cross-border redemption fraud comes up when talking about the bottle bill. It definitely happens. It transfers some money from Vermont to neighboring states, but no one really has great data on exactly how much that happens. The fact is that we struggle to get Vermonters to pull the containers out of the single stream bins and into a redemption bin. So the suggestion that lots of people are going through the trouble of crossing back over with their redemption containers seems fairly far-fetched. But to address the one version of this comment that's come up, Oregon is a good example of a bottle bill that has 4 states bordering it, 3 that don't have bottle bills. Michigan, it's bordered by 3 states, none of which have a bottle bill. Iowa is bordered by 6 different states, none of them have bottle bills. But the big point of this, don't get confused by this issue by the people who have created the issue. The only reason this is an issue is because the bottle manufacturers made a business decision that it's cheaper to put that Vermont stamp on every single one of the containers they sell throughout the country. That's why we have the problem. If they chose to label those containers accurately in the markets that they sell them into, you would not have the possibility of this sort of cross-border fraud. So don't let them come and say, oh, this system's not fair. You're hurting your Vermonters. They created that problem. They can solve it if they want to. Last slide. I hope this has been useful to get the perspective of one of the redemption centers in the state. I really appreciate the opportunity to share our story with you all. I appreciate you taking up this important piece of legislation, and happy to answer any questions if you have any.
With an awareness of time and lots of witnesses, I'll go to Representative Sebelius, had her hand up first, and then Smith.
Thank you, John. Can you go back 2 slides, please? So I want to thank you for traveling here to testify to us today. This is a really important piece of legislation, and you've come a long way. So thank you for that. I want to recognize that. I also want to note that as a 35-year, not lifelong resident of Vermont, helping to resettle new immigrants and refugees into Vermont, when we use the term lifelong Vermonters as advocacy for taking an action, a number of us find that deeply offensive, and I am one of them. So I hope that if you come testify to us again, you will not use that phrase as a means of advocating your position. Thank you.
I appreciate that perspective.
Representative Smith.
Thank you. Your business is strictly redemption, or are you maybe a mini mart or beer sales or anything like that?
No, we're just a redemption center. So that's where we call ourselves an independent. So there are some of us that are just redemption centers.
Do you have any idea how many strictly redemption centers there are in Vermont?
I don't know an accurate number of that. I know that the registration list on ANR is pretty out of date, but I don't know that number. I know that Kim and Jacob Trombley, a couple here in Vermont that have been sort of steadily building their business over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. They, I think, have 6 now, and each of those is independent. And I think there are definitely some up in the northern part of the state, but I couldn't give you an accurate number.
We just had a map of that up, and Matt Chapman did say.
It did show redemption, yeah.
Yeah, it was all the
Are
redemption.
those-
I think those well, no, those couldn't have included, those must have just been independents, right? 'Cause
Redemption.
it couldn't have included every place that sells a beverage in Vermont.
No, it doesn't. It was just redemption centers. Representative Tory.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the support for the local charities.
Yes.
Is that through their own initiative with bottle drives that they do, or do you have like, how does that work?
Yeah, we do it both ways, actually. So our partnership with the Wyndham Solid Waste, we just pick a different charity every month.
Okay.
And so we tell people, if you'd like to go through the trouble of pulling your redeemables out of your recycling and throw it in this bin, we'll give the money to this organization this month. And then we have others where it's like about 20 different charities that we just have written up on our chalkboard, and we have a running tally of cards for each one. And so people can come in and say, we want our bag to go to the Elks Club or the, this ball team or something like that.
Perfect, thank you.
That's what they do in Barry.
Hmm.
Have a board and you can say, sit there.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for coming in today.
Thank you very much.
That we will invite Michael Noel to join us. Via
Hello
Zoom.
there.
Hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Not quite yet. Let me see. I can try turning up the volume on our end. Let's try that.
Test. Hello. Check 1, 2.
That does sound better.
Okay. And is it possible to share my screen?
It is.
All right. I have it up. Do it. Okay. And I sent through my testimony about an hour ago. So hopefully you have it. If not, I'll walk you through it here. Good morning, Chairman Sheldon, Vice Chair Sibilia, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting Thomas to testify this morning. My name is Mike Noel. I'm a Director of Public Affairs here at TOMRA. And I'm going to try and keep this short to respect your time, so I'm just going to jump right in. I will talk about today an intro to TOMRA so you understand where we are coming from. I'll share an overview of the key functions of deposit refund systems or bottle bills as they're known in the US. I can share the best practices of the highest performing bottle deposit systems in the world so you can kind of learn about what works and what doesn't. And then finally, I'll touch on how we would expect H-158 to be implemented. So for TOMRA has 5 decades of experience in deposit refund systems. We're active in 80 markets around the world, including all 10 US states with a bottle deposit system and 34 other deposit refund markets around the world, including the highest performing ones like Germany, Norway, Michigan. And every year we collect 41 billion cans and bottles annually for recycling. The other part of our business is essentially making the curbside system more effective. We sell advanced sorting and robotics equipment. So we play in both sides of the equation, the curbside recycling system and the bottle deposit system.
Can you just, so folks are aware, what does TOMRA stand for and kind of what do you do? Just very generally in plain English.
For sure. And that's a bit about what this slide will be. But TOMRA is we were founded in Norway by 2 brothers. TOMRA is actually Norwegian for empty or return empty. And it was designed as a way to help retailers to accept deposit containers for redemption so they could automate the redemption process and reduce the space required as opposed to manually sorting each container. Our North American headquarters are based in Connecticut, and we have a processing facility based in Essex, Vermont. And what I'll do here is explain our different business areas in the Northeast. In deposit systems, we're active in every link in the deposit value chain. So we provide reverse vending technology, which is the machines you might see at your local grocery store, where you put in your deposit container and you get a voucher for your deposit cash back. We also provide, actually now it's available at Mooresville Beverage in Vermont, bulk feed redemption. It's essentially it looks like a washing machine where you can dump in an entire bag of deposit containers at one time and get paid back immediately. So multiple reverse vending innovations coming out now. We provide service for the reverse vending machines. We provide a clearinghouse function, so clearing the handling fees and the deposits between a retailer, a redemption center, and the beverage company that sold the product. If the beverage distributors don't want to pick up their containers from each location where they're redeemed, Tomer provides a material pickup service. And at the moment, we are the primary material pickup provider. That wasn't always the case. Individual distributors did their own pickup, but as of now, we are the primary pickup agent. We take the material to 2 processing facilities, all the collected deposit containers to either our processing facility in Essex, Vermont, or another one in Rotterdam, New York. And we have other processing facilities throughout the Northeast. From there, we sort the containers and bale them and sell them back to the market to final recyclers on behalf of the beverage industry. To go over quickly, essentially the purpose of deposit refund systems, I'll share an analysis that the Container Recycling Institute did, which shows that deposit systems generate higher recycling rates. It's really the purpose is reducing litter, collecting them, and making sure that they are effectively recycled. So the last Vermont waste characterization report showed was from 2018, and the CRI was able to analyze that report. And from what I understand, they analyzed the container recycling rate published in that report. They removed the bottle bill material and the material that was not going through the curbside system, but handled by the bottle bill. And they removed the tons of glass that was dumped around that time and arrived at a recycling rate for containers that do not have a deposit of 28% and a recycling rate of 87% for containers that do have a deposit in Vermont in 2018. If you have questions about this data, I'd recommend you ask another person who will testify this morning, which is Susan Collins, whose organization did this analysis. But this is similar to the data we see in other states. When you put a deposit on an item, it is more likely it will be recycled because it has a financial value. The second benefit of deposit systems is that they achieve higher quality recycling, avoiding the downcycling of the material. So what you see here is a picture of how glass containers are handled in a typical curbside single stream system on the left. That is glass in there underneath some of the paper. And on the right side is glass containers handled by a deposit system. You can tell it's glass because in the deposit system, the material is separated by material. This keeps it clean. And this is exactly what the buyers of these commodities are asking for. They want clean material so they can use it in higher value products to recycle and make more money. I have data on just how much more valuable the different commodities are in a deposit system. It's in my written testimony. Happy to cover it after my time. So there's about 40 deposit systems in existence today. Yet not all of them are reaching their true potential. You can see Vermont here at around 77% is really in the bottom quartile in the world's deposit systems. So Tomer, since we operate all over the world in most of these systems, we wanted to better understand what separates the high performing systems, those that reach around 90% redemption rate and higher, from those that are failing or are doing underperforming. And so we studied this, and what we found is that the high performing systems generally prioritize 5 principles to frame their program. Number 1 is performance targets. So if you're going to take the time to establish or modernize a deposit system, these programs set a performance target and they enforce that performance target. Say a 90% redemption rate, to make sure that the program is achieving what it sets out to do. These programs set a meaningful deposit, so the public is engaged to participate. And there is a wide scope of beverages in the program to increase their likelihood they'll be recycled. Second principle is circularity. It follows that there are financial incentives and penalties exist to ensure the containers are effectively recycled and not downcycled or wasted. The third principle is convenience. So if you're going to put a deposit on an item and call it a deposit, then these systems make sure it is easy, accessible, and fair for everyone to redeem. The purpose is to avoid the deposit becoming a tax in any way. The fourth principle is thoughtful system management. These programs are a form of extended producer responsibility. The producers do finance the system through handling fees and pickup operations, and they also manage the system within the framework set by the government. For example, the redemption network, a convenient redemption standard, the performance target I mentioned. But these higher performing programs do allow producers to use the revenue generated by the program. That would be the unredeemed deposits and the revenue from the material that is collected. And this helps them cover their costs. It gives them skin in the game, so to speak, to reinvest in the system and make it more convenient and efficient. And then finally, the last principle is system integrity, which is basically providing different measures to make sure that the stakeholders trust the system, including the public. And that is usually implemented through transparent reporting requirements on the containers redeemed and the financials, as well as providing redemption protocols to make sure redemption providers are following rules to make sure everybody is paying for their fair share. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. If I had 2 or 3 more minutes, I would address some 2 common concerns which come up, which is the issue of space required for redemption and pickup, as well as how the system manages unauthorized cross-border redemption today and how it might be managed in the future. Do I have more time, or should I pause there? It's also in my written testimony.
I think it would be helpful to hear that.
Okay. So I testified last year and I think the year before that. And so this topic comes up is how much space is required for a retailer or redemption center to redeem today, and how much would it be required to redeem in a scenario where the state expanded or increased the deposit value. The bill that we're talking about today would exempt stores below 5,000 square feet once the producer responsibility organization is up and running and meets the convenience standard that's in the law. So if you're concerned about convenience, I would look at that convenience standard and make sure that you feel like it is indeed convenient. And then stores below 5,000 square feet would be exempt. The bill also has the PRO establish a plan that would reduce the sorting of containers at redemption centers and retailers. It would raise the incentive essentially for producers to participate in a commingling group. So this would reduce literally the number of boxes that a retailer would need to sort containers into. Of course, the whole other option available to redemption providers is automating the redemption process through a reverse vending machine or other technology. And the vast majority of redemption locations in Vermont today already can afford a reverse vending machine due to the handling fee and the labor savings they will see with such an automated process. So that reduces the space. And then finally, you can reduce the space required all you want for the actual process of sorting, but it's only going to be as effective if they're picked up reliably and at a level that meets your volume for your location. So this bill would have the PRO establish a plan to describe how the materials will be picked up on a timely basis. By my read of the bill, if a producer does not participate in a plan that meets the standard, then their product can be taken off the shelf, as I think Mr. Chapman mentioned earlier. So this is essentially the plan for reducing the space required for redemption and the complexity. And then finally, this issue of cross-border unauthorized redemption. This is how it's managed today. And I think, like the previous testimony said, there's opportunity for strengthening this. This is just how it has, distributors have decided to evolve the system to meet that challenge. So first, containers that are redeemed through reverse vending technology, we have visibility into that. They're connected to the internet in the vast majority of cases. And so we can see if someone redeems 7,000 Corona lights in the morning, and that would trigger our team to go check it out and monitor that location, make sure that there is not suspicious fraud going on there. The second method that's in place today is what's called sampling. So once containers are categorized and sorted, if this is a manual redemption location, they're sorted by each package type, so material and size, and they are tagged at the redemption location by the driver. They're brought back to our processing facility. We remove those bags that have been tagged. We run them through essentially a bulk counting machine to verify that count is accurate, and we apply that across the rest of the containers picked up. So it's a check against the redemption center to make sure that they are redeeming properly. And then finally, some of the distributors have, through their own investment, invested in their own private auditing of certain redemption centers, where roughly quarterly, commingling group will go to these locations and check to make sure that the containers are being sorted properly and that they have the Vermont 5 cent marking on them. Could this be strengthened? Yes, there's opportunities to do that. I think, like the previous testimony said, you can add state-specific markings on the container. And in a reverse vending machine, if a distributor puts a state-specific barcode on their container and they only sell that in Vermont, then if somebody attempts to redeem a container that does not have that barcode, the reverse vending machine will reject the container. So this is not a technology issue. This is a labeling challenge and an inventory challenge, because the distributors will need to accommodate where they sell their containers. There could also be manual redemption protocols established, where the distributors or the PRO require that the containers that go through a manually redeemed location can go through a second count. That's kind of how it's quite a common approach done in the European deposit systems. And then finally, instead of the government essentially determining the best way to handle this challenge, they could task the beverage industry with coming to a preferred solution. So some sort of enabling legislation to determine the best pathway forward relative to the cost they see from this type of behavior. This is what Germany did, and they just because they have a really high deposit value and were concerned about this from neighboring countries, they came up with a really aggressive strategy of adding security ink and a special country-specific label. But that's because they view this as a serious concern, whereas I suspect it's the producers in the US may not want to go do that level of investment. But again, it's up to the industry to, I think, are probably in the best position to come to a solution that makes sense for them. And that's it. Happy to take questions.
All right, a couple of questions. Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask, would your company be, if this bill were to pass, would your company be strained by the additional recyclable material as far as, movement of it? Because there'd be so much more.
The pickup frequency would need, whoever provides the pickup container pickup in Vermont's deposit system, should this bill pass, would need to increase the frequency because there's much more containers in the system. So it would need to pick up, it's quite likely that other pickup providers would join the state because they see an opportunity to provide the service at maybe a lower cost or a different level of service. But I mean, there's the timeline in this bill is sufficient for us to scale up to address it. We operate in New York now, where there's far more containers redeemed on a daily basis than there are in Vermont. Same thing for Maine. So we're confident that we could meet that should this bill go forward.
Thank you.
Representative Stebbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that the concern about space is being addressed by requiring that, pickups have a certain timeliness to them or whatnot. Do we not have that currently? Because I think we heard the previous witness say that, there have been situations in Vermont where retailers or small shops are, just waiting for TOMRA or somebody to come pick up. Do we not have that currently? And how do you address it currently?
So typically it's generally interpreted as the container pickup should be as convenient as the containers being dropped off. So different regulators have interpreted that to use a certain amount of reasonableness, because it's any redemption location is different. If you're a high volume redemption center, you need to be picked up once every other day or 3 times a week. Whereas if you're a small volume retailer, you might only need to be picked up once a month because you're doing 5 bags a month. So we've worked with DEC in the past over the pandemic. There was certainly a challenge to ramp back up after redemption had been shuttered for a number of months. And DEC called a meeting. We had I don't know how many, roughly 30 redemption centers were in attendance, I believe. And they asked, how did you think the service was going with TOMRA? We acknowledged that we had a hard time scaling back up after putting drivers on leave during the shutdown. But most acknowledged, actually everyone on that call acknowledged that was a hit, but that we had picked service back up. So it seems like, at least based on that phone call, that we were meeting the service as required by the law. Looking forward, I think what might be a bit easier with this legislation is that if, say, a retailer or a redemption center has a challenge with pickup or a complaint about pickup, they can call the PRO or they can call DEC, and and DEC can go directly to the PRO and say, hey, this location needs to get picked up. With us, we provide a service based on all these different distributors. So it's not about if we can't make it to a location, they would have to reach out to, the individual distributor. But of course, this redemption center is handling containers from dozens or 100 of different distributors. So in some ways, it makes the chain of communication a bit easier to reach out to the PRO to make sure that, hey, this is the plan you are adhering to. Make sure this location is getting picked up on a timely basis.
It's very helpful. Thank you.
Representative Sibilia.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So in terms of having to accept the beverage container returns, if a PRO forms, then stores below 5,000 square feet are exempt from having to accept materials. I just want to confirm that I'm reading that correctly.
It's not, stores are not at that square footage are not exempt once the PRO forms. Stores below that level are exempt once the PRO meets the convenience standard set by the law. I forgot which page it is, but the law requires that the PRO establish a certain number of redemption centers per county, requiring redemption locations in centers as defined by the law. And I think there's a requirement that there shall be a redemption location within 15 minutes of redeemers. I'm paraphrasing there. So once that level of convenience is kind of guaranteed for the public, then stores below 5,000 square feet can be exempt.
Okay, and I want to just, not being a builder of buildings, just make sure that I understand we're talking about 5,000 square foot buildings. That's mom and pops are typically below that size. Is that right?
Yeah,
We think of as small kind of convenience stores.
certainly. Corner stores would be below this level. I mean, it's not 100% accurate, but there's, in general, small convenience stores would be exempt. Many liquor stores, wine shops, specialty beer stores are below this level. That's not even just tiny stores. I would call that even like small, medium stores would be exempt at this level too.
Okay.
50 feet by 100 feet.
Right. Thank you for your testimony this morning.
Happy to be here.
My goodness, I can't talk. Timing, bad timing. Okay, we have 4 witnesses left and possibly time for 3. So I want to do a survey of the witnesses who remain and see if, Erin, you're in the room. Would you be able to come back at another time since you're in the building?
Yes.
That would be great. I'm sorry to do that, but on me. I've scheduled too many witnesses this morning. So with that, we'll try and get through the remaining 3 folks on the list. And we will ask Scott DeFife, please, to join us.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
You can.
All right, great. I don't really have slides for you, but I did include a couple pictures in my written testimony that we submitted. I do have them up on my screen. I'm not going to show them the entire time, but there'll be a point during my testimony that I get to them and share my screen so that you can see that, or in case there's any questions. I'm Scott DeFife. I'm the president of the Glass Packaging Institute. We're the North American Trade Association of the companies that make the bottles and also recycle the glass. So I'm here largely to talk to you about glass and glass recycling issues within Vermont's bottle bill system. Pleased to be here and testify before the committee again over the course of the past 2 years, and to largely support expansion and modernization of Vermont's bottle bill, and I can get into some specifics. The glass container industry uses recycled glass. It is a key component of making new bottles and jars in North America. Glass is a regional commodity, and by that I mean most of the glass that is used and recycled in New England, in Vermont, and in New England in the region stays within the region. And I can assure you that all of the bottle bill material currently in the system has end markets, strong end markets, and is highly recycled and has the highest best use. And I'll show you some visuals and statistics that prove that out later. The industry is committed to increasing the glass recycling rate around the country and the use of more recycled content. We can do that only with greater supply. From the glass perspective, it is really not a demand side problem at all. We are using every available ton of clean, non-contaminated glass that we can get our hands on and back in our furnaces. It has tremendous environmental benefits to use recycled glass to make new bottles. It is really just a function of how much clean, non-contaminated material can we get that is being diverted from landfills. That is why we support programs like Vermont's bottle bill. Quality and contamination are the key. In Mike's testimony, he showed you a picture of bottle bill glass and single stream glass. I've got another one. It was in my presentation. The top picture is typical Murph glass. I'm not going to tell you that this is from Vermont. I'm not suggesting that, but that is typical of what the glass commodity looks like in commingled single stream systems. It is hard to tell that there's glass in there because of the way that the single stream Murphs handle glass as a negative sort through the system. All of the small fraction, the other stuff, the small plastic straws, caps, things of that nature, and things that don't belong in the recycling stream usually end up in the glass pile of the commingled system. This is another picture. This one happens to be color sorted as well as source separated bottle bill material, but you can see that's glass. You can tell it's glass. It's whole bottle glass largely. We can recover virtually every amount of what's in that picture. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second, come back to the testimony, and happy to put that back up. So quality and contamination are the key differentiators as to what the potential end markets are for recycled glass. And the vast majority of the material that we get as an industry throughout the United States, at least, is coming from the 10 states that have bottle bill systems. So when a state does have a bottle bill system, we recommend strongly that they lean into that and expand it and put as much of the glass in that system as they can. Because the processing facilities in the region, with 5 states, Vermont plus 4 other states in the Northeast, using bottle bill programs, the processing facilities in the region are more likely to be able to process cleaner streams of glass than MRF glass. There are facilities in the Northeast that do, but there are not as many of them, and they are a little bit further away from Vermont than the multiple other processing facilities that can handle the cleaner streams of glass. I can talk about all of the different issues related to glass and why glass is a great material. I heard some questions earlier about reuse and refill that I'm happy to expand upon. We work on those issues, and we have experience working with the other states that have reuse and refill systems. But because the bill in front of the committee this year is different than the bills that have passed the House before, H-158 is different in a couple of very significant ways than last session's 175. I wanted to really focus on some of the key different provisions that have been pointed out so far. I would say that GPI is not opposed to the concept of a PRO, a producer responsibility organization. That is a concept that we work with often. And all of the states that are discussing extended producer responsibility for broader packaging products are talking about PROs. That is not the issue at all. We think it can bring efficiency to the operation. Our recommendation would be, however, that if Vermont does switch to a PRO, that you want to have more robust transparency in the PRO that you form, perhaps even with an advisory board of stakeholders, such as the material groups and other groups that are related to the system or will be taking material from the system, so that we can give technical advice about the recycling of our materials. That should have broad representation from the entire supply chain and value chain of the materials that are collected through the program. Specifically with regards to wine, there is absolutely no reason to delay the introduction of wine bottles into the system at any later date than the expansion of any of the other materials, the other products that are being added. There's nothing different about a wine bottle than any of the other materials that are coming through. Certainly, there's nothing different about a spirits bottle that is different than a wine bottle. They are most commonly 750 milliliters in size, generally the same size and shape, and a lot of 750 milliliter bottles that are produced can equally handle spirits or wine. The great thing about glass is you can put whatever beverage you want into it in whatever shape you want the bottle is in, and it really doesn't matter as to the recyclability of the material or the package. California has expanded its bottle bill last year to include wine and spirits, and is giving a 1.5 year transition time for the expansion of wine and spirits also. Other states are considering expanding to wine. Oregon, after its EPR bill, and Washington State is debating a bill right now that not only has a DRS, a deposit return system, in its EPR program, but would fully encompass all beverages right from the start. In the same section, I would say in a smaller area, there's really no need to have a long study period for what the amounts are. The amount is either 5 cents, typically, or 10 cents for larger containers. Or since the bill is already going forward with 15 cents for spirits, you could make the case that you could align that with the wine bottles as well. I don't think it requires a lot of study. And again, there's nothing different about a wine bottle than any other different sized bottles. Other states that do this sometimes differentiate on size. But really, there's no particular reason to differentiate based on what's in the package. On page 14, section 3, we really we think that the provision to compensate MRFs for the expansion of the redemption program is unnecessary. I understand from a political standpoint that they may feel that they may be losing some material to the bottle bill system, but as others have said, there are tremendous benefits and savings to taxpayers and ratepayers from removing material from the waste management stream and from the residual deposit of that material into landfills, which saves communities money. If there are going to be studies about the costs of implementing the system, we would ask that those same studies include all the benefits of expanding the systems and operating the systems and things of that nature, because there are significant savings from a loss of paying landfill tip fees to passive loss of recyclable materials into the system, into the landfills. Similarly, with studies about carbon impacts and other things, we would say make sure that you're balancing the savings and the benefits, the costs incurred and the benefits. There was a mention of refill and reuse. Really, the deposit program is the best way to help capture and separate the containers to get refilled. A deposit can help incentivize the return of those containers. They will go a different place, but in Oregon, where they do include refillable beer, the deposit still exists on the bottle, but the redemption centers and the system, the PRO, if you will, the DRO in Oregon is what it's called, handles the separation of the refillable bottles from the single use bottles, and one gets refilled, one gets recycled. Lastly, there are some provisions at the end, page 23, that we really don't think are necessary. There is no need to do additional study of the end markets for recycled glass. We know what the end markets are. NERC, which is the Northeast Recycling Council, has a hierarchy of uses for recycled glass back into containers, is at the top after reuse and refill. And all of the other end markets that may take some portion of the recycled glass that would come through the system can still be served by the material that flows through the bottle bill, because ultimately that material does go to a glass processor and it has to be cleaned before it can be used for anything. Aggregate, other things that you may hear about, can't take contaminated material. It still has to be cleaned. The real difference between them, and I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. It was in one of my my graphics that I shared in the testimony, is a chart that we put at the back about the efficiency and yield loss in different systems. Is this showing my yield loss graphic?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So really, there's contamination, which is non-glass residue, things that are not glass. Okay. And then within the glass system, the biggest difference between single stream and more secure separate streams, whether it be bottle bill or managed separate stream collection, as in a dual stream or other EPR programs that have a separate glass collection bin, is what we call fines. And if the collections truck has a hydraulic press, which most do, and smashes all the material, the commingled material together, then you're basically scrambling the egg and then taking it to a facility to take the shells out, or you're scrambling the eggs inside the carton and the carton's getting wet and you're trying to take the shells out while you also find a way to cook the eggs. And this is very difficult to do. So the efficiencies of separate collection that are benefited by the bottle bill are tremendous and really increase the yield of the usable material that comes back into the recycling system. 98% plus of a bottle that comes back through a bottle bill is usable by all end markets that follow, whereas single stream 40%, and this really depends upon the facility that it's going to. It can be higher, but often is not higher than 50%. The fines are the really small fraction. So after it's crushed and where it's crushed, in what stage it's crushed, determines, is that glass or is that a piece of sand? Is that dirt? Is it glass? What color is it? Can I sort the color? Things of that nature are all harder in commingled single stream glass. I am not saying that commingled single stream glass cannot be turned back into a new container. It can, it's just much more difficult at every other step of the process. And so with that, I am happy to take any questions. I know in the past there have been some discussions about quality issues. I tried to address that with my contamination testimony, but I'm happy to answer questions about glass, reuse, refill, materials, and beverages. Thank you.
Members, are there questions? Representative Sibilia.
Thank you for your testimony. So Scott, I'm looking at section 8 and the implementation study. And on your testimony, are you recommending that we just take that whole, it appears to largely deal just with glass?
Yeah.
So are you recommending that we take the entire study out?
I don't really think it's necessary. It certainly should not delay the inclusion of certain beverage types into the system. If there are, it's not about the glass. If there are issues, it's about the same things that you discussed with the Redemption Center, with John and or Mike, about space and things of that nature. But we really do believe, as Mike suggested, that if the program is expanded, more entrants will come in. There is plenty of time. It certainly shouldn't take 3 or 4 years to figure this out. It can be done on the same time frame as the expansion of all the other beverages, right? So you're expanding to tea and other beverages that are not currently in the program. Some of those are in glass, some of those are not in glass. Wine is predominantly in glass, but not entirely in glass. Spirits is predominantly in glass, but not entirely in glass. There's nothing, this is not rocket science. We have done this before, is done in other states, and I would suggest that it doesn't need another study to delay further implementation of glass being added to the system.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, it appears there must have been some conflict at some point. So I'm sure we'll hear about it if it still exists.
Yeah.
In the last session, there was some debate that didn't necessarily happen in front of the House committee.
Representative Logan and Stebbins.
Thank you. Could you please provide an example of how single stream glass in Vermont relates to the graphic that you showed us?
I would say that there's a couple of the larger MRFs in Vermont, Chittenden and the Casella MRF, are the two primary ones. I would say that they largely have decent equipment. It could very well be that their residual is better than 50%. But still, it has to go to a different facility that can sort all different manner of things than just, hey, I know that there's a load of glass coming. Every glass processor is handling material. Some glass processors can handle more contaminated material than others. Caps are really not, that's something that every glass processor looks for. The things that we have to keep out of a furnace, metal, ceramics, Pyrex, light bulbs, things of that nature. That is much more prevalent in a single stream contamination, not because of the MRF necessarily, but because of the other inbound material that comes through it. I'm not criticizing the efficiency of the program, but even at its best, a single stream system, is not giving you anywhere near the clarity of a bottle bill return system.
And so then by implication, that means that glass would be downcycled or landfilled?
Yes. I would say, I know that there is a rule against landfilling glass in Vermont, and we, with other witnesses, have talked about Chittenden. I believe the committee's heard about that instance in the past. In addition, I would tell you that anytime you look at a waste characterization study and you see the words residual landfill, that has glass in it. So there is, the residual stream usually is the glass plus stream because of the way that single stream MRFs are engineered. Not on every case, but in most cases, you're going to get some passive loss of glass to the landfill through the residual contamination category.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Stebbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it possible that one of the previous witnesses mentioned that they had in their written testimony some data as to how much more value there is for glass that's collected via deposit versus other approaches?
Yep.
I asked for that because I don't see his written testimony, but since you're here, could you, do you have that info?
Glass first of all, glass has positive market value as a material commodity. Bottle bill glass all has positive market value as a material commodity. Color separated glass is a little bit better, but really that's an older construct that it really isn't necessary anymore. We do not need communities to be separating the colors. Every glass processing facility worth its, modern self has optical sorters that can sort the colors. Okay. So we don't need the system to necessarily sort the colors for us. The difference is really going to be, is the bottle plant nearby making clear glass or green or amber? And, you may get a fractional $1 or $2 or $5 or more difference in the value of the ton, but you're talking about $15 to $25 to $50 to $75 or $80 a ton as the glass is cleaner and ready to go back into a furnace. It could even be $100 a ton by the time that it's done. As a trade association, there's certain limits, antitrust limits that we have as to knowing exactly the price that everybody gets, for every ton that's delivered in every different place. But largely, source separated glass at a minimum level of cleanliness, especially bottle bill material, is $35, $45, $50 a ton. MRF glass, you will often hear people report, waste managers or recycling managers or budget folks tell you that MRF glass has negative value. That is because of the contamination, not because of the glass. And because the glass processor has to take all of that ton. If you give me a truckload that is half glass and half not glass, then the glass processor has to landfill the half that's not glass and may not get as high quality out of that as well. So more of its fines, less of its usable glass back in a container plant, and that the fines have less value than the usable cullet. So a MRF stream of glass is compromised on value by both the contamination and the fines, not the glass and the transportation of landfill material from a pit stop to another pit stop before it goes to a landfill.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today.
Absolutely. Happy to be with you.
With that, we are going to welcome Mike Smaha.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Mike Smaha. I'm Vice President of Government Relations at the Can Manufacturers Institute, the U.S. Trade Association representing metal can makers and their suppliers. In the interest of time, I won't go through my entire written testimony. You guys have it. I do just want to highlight a couple of things. One, we definitely welcome and support the modernization and updating of Vermont's program, especially the addition of cider, ready to drink cocktails and wine into the program. Obviously, these are big time growing segments for the aluminum can industry, and just adding these beverage categories into the program obviously is going to generate more glass collected and more aluminum cans collected. So I think that's a really important thing for the program in the long run. Second, I want to touch upon labeling and label flexibility. On page 8 in the bill, there is a simple sentence that allows the Vermont and 5-cent deposit to be printed on either the side of the container or on the top. In Vermont, the current law says that for metal cans, it has to be embossed on the top. Actually, Vermont and California are the only 2 states that require that. The other 8 deposit states allow that flexibility of where the label can be placed, and that's really important for the aluminum can industry. When you take a look at the top of the can, you see the ring of states and deposit values. And quite frankly, we're running out of real estate at the top of that can. So being able to print that on the side of the label would mean a lot for our industry, especially as we're trying to look at new states and creating programs there. We're kind of, again, running out of space on top of the can. So I'm happy to answer any questions you folks have, and I appreciate your time today.
Right. So Mr. Smaha is from the Can Manufacturers Institute. So the folks who make the cans and want the material back to make new cans.
Exactly.
So any questions for him today? Representative Stebbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you guys struggle? I think we heard testimony that this isn't the case, but do you struggle with contamination very much at all?
None on the contamination side. Our issue is actually at what happens in sortations at the MRF. So we had a national survey conducted about 5 years ago and found that 25% of aluminum cans that are sorted at material recovery facilities actually get missorted, and they end up in piles with other kinds of metals. And that may mean that aluminum can, is kind of lost and sent, to aluminum that's used in, vehicles, for example. So the thing that we love about these deposit programs is you've got that just easy source separation of aluminum cans.
Thanks.
If you could just briefly share how many times that aluminum can be recreated into more aluminum product.
Yeah, it actually can be infinitely recycled. That's the great thing about aluminum. It takes about 60 days from the product being purchased by the consumer, then recycled, then gets sent down to an aluminum can sheet manufacturer who could just melt down that can, turn it into brand new can sheet, send it to one of my members who creates the can, then gets it out to the beverage company for filling, and they're the ones that stick the lid on top and get it right out on the market. So it's really a 60-day cycle.
Representative Stebbins.
One more question for me. Why is the tab so much more valuable? Is it just because it's more mass, or like the?
Yeah.
Is that an urban legend?
Or is that a legend?
I think that might be an urban legend. I've never heard that the tab itself has more value in it.
Well, because like little not little Boy Scouts collecting them in bottles for no, okay. Thanks.
Sure, thank you all.
Someone's been yanking your chain.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining
Got
us.
it. Take care, everybody.
All right. We have one more witness lined up, Susan Collins, who's been patiently waiting. I just want to check in that with her. She's on the line. Welcome, Ms. Collins.
Hello.
Hi. Just want to circle it. So it was about 15 minutes left. Is that going to be enough time for you?
Oh,
It will, and if it's just enough time for my presentation, but you have more questions, I'm happy to come back. I'm happy to do it any way you want. I'm very flexible.
All right, well, let's dive in.
All right. It will take me a few seconds to find my presentation and make it pop up on screen. And then another second to actually make it be the right format. So first of all, thank you for having me. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. I hope that this is showing up in the right format. It looks good on my end. I hope it does for you.
It does.
Okay, great, thanks. I'll just move right along then. And by this point, you've heard some of the points that I'm going to make, so I'm going to try to skip over some things so that I'm not just repeating what the other speakers have said. We've talked a lot about the benefits of deposit systems. Some additional information that we calculated here at our organization, I'll point out on this slide, the greenhouse gas emissions. We have a huge database of all this information here. And we calculated that adding wine and non-carbonated beverages in Vermont would reduce greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to taking nearly 1,600 cars off the road. And I will back up one step. I didn't introduce myself. I am Susan Collins from the Container Recycling Institute. We've been around for more than 30 years, and we specialize in having a database of all of the information about beverage container deposit programs so that we can provide research and education to communities who need this information. We've talked a little bit about litter. I have a little bit of data here from studies that are done in the Great Lakes. Michigan is the one piece on this chart that is in green. Michigan has about half as much beverage container litter as the other states because it is the one state of these 5 states that has a deposit law. And this 50% reduction is something that we see over and over. It's consistent with national data from Keep America Beautiful. And it's also consistent with a big international study that was done by a research organization with the government of Australia. So what's happened in the last decade or so related to beverage containers, the big change has been the growth in PET plastic water sales. So water, 30 years ago kind of wasn't a thing as far as a beverage that people would purchase. Back in 1996, the sales of bottled water were only 3 billion containers. Yes, that's billion with a B. 3 billion containers nationally, and they've increased more than 30-fold in this time period. So our estimate for 2021 is that sales of bottled water were 86 billion nationally. So in about 2015, water became the single largest beverage type. That's why it's so important that this bill includes water because it now eclipses the sales of other beverage types. And there was some discussion earlier today about how much this expansion would cover. It would basically roughly double the number of containers that are covered by the law. There's been a lot of discussion about adding wine to the program. And so we looked in our database for all of the deposit laws in the world that include wine, and we found 28 of them. So it's becoming more and more common to add wine to your deposit system. In fact, both California and Quebec did so last year. Here's what it looks like. This slide shows the deposit amount and coverage by state. And the blue areas on this chart are places where the beverage is covered by the law for that state. So as I mentioned, California doesn't yet have wine in its program. It passed a few months ago. We'll turn those cells blue starting January 1st of 2024. And now it's, of course, being discussed in Vermont, and expansions are being discussed in most of these other states as well. So this chart is generally turning more and more blue as these programs get expanded to cover more beverage types. This is our actually one of our most popular slides that we ever produce. It shows that the deposit containers nationally, when you add them all up in all the deposit states, they have a redemption rate of 65%, but the recycling rate for non-deposit containers nationally is only 24%. So that's the difference that the deposit makes. And this next slide shows what it looks like in Vermont. And it's pretty similar, actually. The bottle bill containers are having a recycling rate of about 87%. That's both through the redemption program and the additional containers that are recycled through curbside. While the non-bottle bill containers have a recycling rate of 28%. Was there a question on this?
No.
Okay. So that's typical of what we see in other places. We were surprised when we saw some different numbers in a report that was produced for the state. And so we looked into the report and we found that there were several errors in the report. We went through meticulously, found the errors, corrected the errors, did the recalculation, and that's how we came up with this 28% number. I'm sorry, there's so much information on this slide. I just want to show my work so that you can follow along with those numbers. We've also done a projection nationally of what would be the best case scenario if curbside programs were used to capture beverage containers and if they worked flawlessly without any of these contamination issues that we have, without any issues of people not putting the right thing in the right bins. And the best case scenario is 38%. We're not the only ones who have done a study like this. It's also a similar study was done by the beverage producers themselves in the UK, came up with similar results. This is as far as we can take it if we don't rely on a beverage container system. So the middle of the road beverage container system nationally gets about 82%, or I'm sorry, internationally, which means that the average bottle bill program will be double what the very best curbside program could ever possibly do. I think it's going to come up that whether or not how this is going to affect municipalities financially. So I wanted to address this issue right away. Without deposits, roughly 25% of beverage containers are recycled. And so with the deposit program, municipalities save money in 8 different ways, as we show on this slide. They save on collection costs for recyclables, processing costs for recyclables. I'm not going to read all of these, but it's all these other costs, including landfill tipping fees. And the only revenue that municipalities lose from the imposition of a deposit law is from the sale of recyclables. And this issue has been studied a lot over many decades. So at the very bottom of this slide, there's a link to a summary of 33 studies that have been done around the world that have all found that there are cost savings for municipalities through the implementation of deposit programs. So I wanted to address that as a myth that comes up that somehow this is going to hurt municipalities. It's not going to hurt municipalities. It's been studied a zillion times, and we've got the documentation here for you if you want to look into it further. So furthermore, some new information that came out last year, there was a study that was done by the National Waste and Recycling Association. That is the national trade association of the companies that do waste hauling and have own MRFs, material recovery facilities, and own landfills. So those folks did a study and they found that if there was an expansion of the law as proposed in Vermont, that it would add about $2 per year in costs per household, just as a result of changes at the MRF. So it was a really narrow study that, only picked a portion of the financial picture. So we separately calculated a little bit more of the financial picture and found that a slightly higher amount would be saved in landfill tipping fees per household. So those two things cancel each other out. So using their own data about the way that they looked at material recovery facilities, as well as just enhancing that data a little bit by looking at landfill tipping fees, we found that there would be no financial impact to households as a result of a beverage container deposit law. And in fact, we had previously done a study in Massachusetts in 2016 and found that the existing bottle bill there was saving cities and towns $20 million per year. And I also, just in case this comes up, I want to emphasize that there's no change to aluminum containers in this law, because the vast majority of aluminum beverage containers are already covered in the current law. So there's no point really in discussing whether there would be any changes to MRF revenue from aluminum containers as a result of this new bill. This is another one, though, that came up in discussion. You asked about scrap value of materials. And in all cases, the most pure material is going to be worth more. That makes sense, right? That nobody has to pay extra money to clean up the material. I just looked up the numbers for PET plastic yesterday. The deposit value material is $380 a ton, and PET plastic from curbside programs is $230 a ton. And I ran that through my calculator. The difference is that it's worth about 65% more right now if it's deposit grade material, because that's food grade material that can be made back into food containers again. And that's a very important distinction. We've got the curbside glass numbers here. It costs about $20 a ton. On average, it can be up to $40 a ton to get rid of curbside glass. Deposit glass, around $20 a ton. I've seen 25 recently as well. And then aluminum can also be what they call spec and off spec. And the spec material means it's all aluminum beverage containers, and that is very highly valued. It's worth more money. Off-spec material has other things like aluminum foil and cat food cans added into the aluminum. And I want to emphasize something else about this. In all three of these cases, the curbside material goes to a different facility than the deposit material. The facilities are configured to handle one type of material or the other type of material. In a few cases, I've seen glass where both of them are handled at the same facility. But in general, the off-spec aluminum has to go to a completely different facility to get sorted out. And it's the same with the other materials. So this is essentially my last slide. I just want to also mention that beyond immediate impacts, we must consider the catastrophic long-term economic, environmental, and societal impacts resulting from plastic pollution, marine debris, and climate change if we do not do our part to create a more circular economy. When it comes to that greenhouse gas number that I gave at the very beginning of the presentation, the number of cars off the road that this would equate to, it's the one type of greenhouse gas reducing legislation that you can pass that doesn't have any cost to the government. It's a law that's passed, it's paid for by the producers and consumers, and yet the state gets the benefit of the greenhouse gas reduction. My last slide here is just additional information on how to contact us. We have 2 different websites that are essentially a resource library on this kind of information. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We have a couple questions. Representative Clifford, then Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yes, just for my own benefit, I need to understand, how do the bottles, and like the glass bottles, the wine bottles you spoke of at the beginning of the presentation, how does that affect the greenhouse gas emissions again? Could you explain that to me?
Sure. Glass in particular, it takes a lot less energy to produce glass using glass that's already made as glass than raw materials. So when glass is made from raw materials, it's sand and limestone and a couple of other ingredients that are put into a furnace and melted. And it basically takes 1,100 tons of material to make 1,000 tons of glass. There are byproducts, and one of the biggest byproducts is CO2. There are also other greenhouse gases that are released through the melting together of those materials. It's just basically a chemical reaction that happens. So the making of glass from raw materials directly produces greenhouse gases as byproducts, in addition to all of the energy that's used to melt the materials. So that's the first way that you save greenhouse gases, when you use bottles to make bottles again. You turn the bottles into crushed glass, and you don't have to use the raw materials, so you don't have those byproducts. But then the second way that it reduces greenhouse gases is that it also can be done at a lower melting temperature. They can actually lower the temperature of the furnace when they're using crushed glass and just melting it again to make new glass. So that the using less energy also helps save greenhouse gases. I hope that was what you were going for with the question.
Thank you very much. I never knew. Thank you.
Representative Smith Ventori.
Thank you. Thank you. You touched on a question that I was going to ask you about glass, but I'd like to go to aluminum. When, say, the state of Vermont puts together all their aluminum and it's sent to a big recycling center somewhere to be melted down and new aluminum sheets and new aluminum cans are created, there's a melting point somewhere there. Can you tell me, these big plants that do this, what do they use to melt down with? Do they use electricity or do they use fossil fuels?
It varies. There are melting facilities all over the world, and so they're going to use whatever energy mix is provided. So commonly in the United States, they're going to be buying energy from the grid, and a lot of the can sheet manufacturers, the melters, are located in places that use hydropower. I mean, if you look at them on a map, you know, kind of, they're mostly east of the Mississippi, and it makes sense to site them in places where energy costs are lower, because energy is a huge cost input to making the cans because they have to melt the aluminum.
So hydropower would be, they'd be using electricity then to melt.
They would, but it's not that they're directly using hydropower. It's that they're using the energy mix provided by the energy supplier in the area. And there's a lot more hydropower in some of these areas where the cans are made.
All right, being that you you represent the Container Recycling Institute, you probably know what percentage of all the aluminum melted down is used, how much percentage is used with fossil fuels.
No, you've stumped me. I have never looked at, you know, the energy mix going to each one of those different plants and tried to break it down into how much is fossil fuel, how much is hydro. It could be done, but I've never done that.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Tory.
Thank you. My question was just about the distribution of these centers. Like, do we have a lot in the Northeast for glass and aluminum?
You're very fortunate. Glass, there's a facility in the Montreal area. There are several throughout the Northeast. There's one in Connecticut. There's a couple in New York. So there are great local sources, and indeed the glass that's going through the bottle bill right now is going to those facilities. And there are a lot of places that wish that they had as many glass processing facilities as close by as you all do in Vermont.
Great, thanks.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Right, members, with that, we will adjourn until 1:15 today.